In 1981, a man is dropped off for a 5-month stay to photograph the wilderness and wildlife of the Alaskan bush. He takes everything he needs for the stay and more. However, a simple miscommunication with a pilot leaves him stranded and fighting for survival. This is the story of Carl McCunn. Most people know the story of Chris McCandless. His life is depicted in the Paramount vintage movie Into the Wild and the 1996 book by John Krakauer of the same name. It tells the true story of a 24-year-old that hitchhiked into the Alaskan wilderness. He followed the Stampede Trail and found an abandoned bus on the eastern bank of the Susquehanna River. McCandless was motivated by the various books that he had read and wanted to experience living off of the land in a remote area of Alaska. After a series of errors in judgment, Chris found himself trapped on the far side of the Teklenika River. The river rose from runoff from the mountains during the summer, and in mid-August of 1992, he died of starvation. Chris kept a diary of his time in the bus, and his final entry read, "I have had a happy life and thank the Lord. Goodbye, and may God bless all." If Chris McCandless had ever heard of a man named Carl McCunn, he may have thought twice or at least been better prepared to enter the Alaskan wilderness. Carl McCunn's story is a precursor to Chris McCandless. Carl McCunn was born in Munich, Germany in 1947, while his father was stationed there in the U.S. Army following the Second World War. He grew up in Texas and joined the Navy shortly after high school. He served 4 years, then eventually ended up in Anchorage, Alaska, following his dream of being a wildlife photographer. During Carl's time in Anchorage, he took trips into the wilderness to capture the amazing Alaskan landscape and wildlife. In 1976, he spent 5 months in the Brooks Range. This is an extremely remote mountain range in northern Alaska. This range is mostly uninhabited even by Alaskan standards. The Brooks Range forms the northernmost divide in North America, with streams on the north side flowing into the Arctic Ocean and streams on the south side flowing into the northern Pacific. The wildlife includes sheep, bears, wolves, moose, and caribou. This area is one of the most remote and least disturbed wildernesses in North America. Carl was so impressed by this remote and isolated area of the world that he wanted to capture its beauty through photography. This experience provided Carl with the motivation and confidence to do more deep wilderness camps alone to photograph nature. In 1981, he returned to the Brooks Range on another 5-month photography trip. He hired a bush pilot to drop him off 220 miles, 362 kilometers northeast of Fairbanks. He was dropped off at the confluence of the Colleen and Porcupine Rivers. As this was not Carl's first trip, he came prepared. He had 500 rolls of film, 1,400 pounds, 640 kilograms of provisions, 2 rifles, and a shotgun. The bush pilot dropped him off in March, and after arriving, Carl threw away 2 boxes of shotgun shells in the river as he believed he had brought too much and it was only weighing him down. This action would later torment him. Over the next 5 months, Carl lived off of his provisions while photographing nature. The 5 months that he lived below the Brooks Range were very successful and fulfilling for Carl. He also kept a diary of his activities during this time. However, when early August came and went, Carl knew that he had made a terrible mistake. He believed the bush pilot was returning to pick him up in early August, but that was clearly not the case. Carl wrote in his diary, "I think I should have used more foresight in arranging my departure. I'll soon find out." The bush pilot later recalled that he had told Carl that he might be in Alaska at the end of the summer. Carl had paid the pilot for airplane repairs and to be taken into the mountains and to be dropped off, but no payment or arrangements had been made to pick him up. The pilot assumed that because it was not definite that he would be in the area at the end of the summer, Carl had made other arrangements to be picked up. However, Carl had not made other arrangements. At this point, Carl didn't know how long it would be until someone came looking for him. So, he began rationing the food that he had left. He began hunting in an attempt to live completely off of the land to keep his provisions for winter if it took that long. Initially, he was successful. He shot ducks and muskrat. He even pulled a carcass of a caribou that had died in the lake, but he was not able to properly preserve the meat, and it spoiled. He wrote, "Humans are so out of their modern-day element in a place like this." His provisions were becoming low, and he began getting extremely worried that no one was coming. He was hoping that his family would contact someone to look for him when he didn't arrive. He had provided maps to his family and friends, but no itinerary, so his family didn't know when he was to return. He had also asked his father not to contact the police if he was not back by the end of summer, because if the trip was going well, he would probably stay longer. Carl wrote, "Certainly someone in town should have figured something must be wrong, me not being back by now. But then again, there's probably no one in town who gives a. What in the hell do those people think I gave them maps of my location for? Decoration?" But his friends came through. His friends called the Alaskan State Troopers and informed them of Carl's location and that he should have returned by now. The state troopers immediately had a bush pilot fly to his location to check on him. Carl had also provided a map of his location to the state police, so his camp was not difficult to find. In the first pass, the pilot flew over the camp and saw Carl waving his orange sleeping bag very casually in the air. As Carl didn't seem distressed, the pilot made a second pass. On the second pass, the pilot indicated that Carl had casually waved to him. The pilot took a third pass. On the third pass, the pilot indicated that Carl was slowly walking to his tent and did not signal the pilot. The pilot surmised that because there was no indication of distress, that Carl was not in need of assistance. Carl, however, believed that the pilot was getting help. Later that evening, Carl began to rethink his interaction with the pilot. Carl wrote, "I recall raising my right hand, shoulder high, and shaking my fist on the plane's second pass. It was a little cheer, like when your team scored a touchdown or something. Turns out that's the signal of, all okay, do not wait. It is certainly my fault I'm here now. Man, I can't believe it. I really feel like a klutz. Now I know nobody's shown up from that incident." However, Carl's luck soon changed slightly. Soon after this unfortunate event, Carl was digging up a trench when he found a cache of rabbit snares and candles. He set the snares and kept hunting to stay alive. He caught rabbits and squirrels for a while, but the lake was freezing over and snow was becoming more and more regular. He saw his first wolf and tried to shoot it with his .22. The wolf yelped and ran into the bush. He wrote, "Bad shot and bad show of patience." By October, he was snaring rabbits, but wolves and foxes had realized that the rabbits were easy prey when they were snared, so they were stealing Carl's food. This severely reduced Carl's food. He was not able to compete with the natural predators in the region. Carl wrote again in his diary, "It's been a terrible day for me, and I won't go into it. Hands getting more frostbitten every day. Have only one meal of beans left. Honestly, I'm scared for my life, but I won't give up." In November, Carl ran out of food. He caught a squirrel and wrote, "But that's only a tease, even when you chew up and swallow all the bones, too." Around Thanksgiving, he wrote, "I feel miserable. Have the chills upon waking for the past 3 days. I can't take much more of this. Can't stop thinking about using this bullet." As the end of November came, the weather continued to grow colder and more inhospitable. Carl wrote, "I'm burning the last of my emergency Coleman light and just fed the fire the last of my split wood. When the ashes cool, I'll be cooling along with them. I chickened out once already, but I don't want to go through the chills again. They say it doesn't hurt." Carl wrote a letter to his father explaining how to develop his film, and requested from the person that found him that his belongings be given to his father. He offered his rifles and shotgun to the person that found him for their trouble. He pinned the note to his ID and entered his final diary entry. "If my body has been eaten on, or if it turns out I take my own life, just put me under a tree so I can at least make a decent meal for some critter. I don't want my family to see me that way. They'll be hurt enough as it is. Should I crazily attempt walking out in my condition and am nowhere to be found, please carry out the above will. I kindly thank whoever may do so. The ID is me, Natch." By January, Carl's friends were extremely worried and called the Alaskan State Troopers office again. On February 2, 1982, several state troopers rode in a plane equipped with skis to land on the snow. They landed near Carl's campsite. They found his body inside his tent, along with the note, his 100-page diary, and the rifle Carl had used to shoot himself. As Carl's father described him, Carl was 6'2", 240 pounds, with reddish-brown hair and an outgoing personality. Beware of the dangers of the Alaskan wilderness, and rest in peace, Carl McCunn. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Thanks for watching.